Welcome back to the Board Business Channel, everybody. Today, we're going to be looking into a company you might not have heard of, but they're quietly powering a lot of the technology you use every single day.
That's right.
We're talking about AcBel.
AcBel.
Yeah, so let's jump right in and tell everybody what is it that AcBel actually does.
Well, they started out actually way back in 1981, just as distributors for electronic components.
Okay.
And it was only later that they got into the business of actually building power supplies.
So the nuts and bolts, and then they were like, well, hey, we could actually make the whole thing.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
So they joined the Kinpo Group in 1996, and that's when things really kind of took off for them.
Okay, so for those who aren't familiar, what is the Kinpo Group? I mean, how big of a deal is it? Is this like when you sign with a major record label as a band?
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
The Kinpo Group is one of the largest contract manufacturers in the world.
Okay.
They make everything from laptops and tablets to printers and servers. And so AcBel joining them really gave them access to a huge manufacturing and distribution network.
Okay, so they've got the connections, they've got the know-how. I mean, that's got to be a nice boost for a company like that.
Absolutely.
So where are they now? I mean, what's their global footprint look like? Are they just kind of in one region or?
Well, after joining Kinpo, they really started to expand globally.
Okay.
And now they've got operations in Asia and in the Americas.
Oh, got it.
Really strategically placed to meet customer demand wherever it is.
It's like they put those power outlets right where you need them.
Exactly.
Okay, so I get that they make power supplies, but like what kind of power supplies are we talking about?
So AcBel specializes in power management technology for a wide range of applications.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everything from consumer electronics to servers and data centers.
Okay.
They're actually a key partner to a lot of the leading global corporations. You know,
Okay.
and that's why they're considered one of the top power supply manufacturers in the world.
Wow.
I mean, if you think about all the devices that we use every day, you know, from our smartphones to our computers, you know, they all need a reliable source of power.
Right.
And AcBel is one of the companies that make sure that that power is there.
It's like they're the silent partner making sure everything runs smoothly.
Exactly. They're kind of like the stage crew.
Yeah.
You know, they're behind the scenes, but they're essential to the show.
I like that analogy.
Yeah,
The silent heroes of the tech world.
that's right.
Okay, so speaking of big moves in the tech world, AcBel also made a pretty significant acquisition back in Q3 of 2023. They acquired OmniOn,
Oh, yeah.
which used to be ABB power conversion.
Right.
So what was the thinking behind that? I mean, what did they gain from that acquisition?
Well, you know, OmniOn was already a well-established player in the telecom power sector.
Okay.
And so by acquiring them, AcBel was able to kind of immediately boost their revenue in that area.
Okay.
But it also gave them a foothold in some key growth areas like data centers and charging stations.
Okay.
So, you know, it's a pretty strategic move.
So like they leveled up their power game, basically.
Exactly.
All right, so now let's talk about the guy at the helm of all of this, Jerry Su, who took over as chairman in August of 2021. His dad, you know, he was the Kinpo Group chairman, so it was a bit of a family affair there, a changing of the guard.
It was, yeah, you know, a 40-year-old company, a new generation stepping in.
Right.
And it's interesting because Jerry didn't just sort of parachute into the top job. You know, he actually worked his way up through the Kinpo Group.
Oh, wow.
Started in operations, then went to procurement, then sales. And
So he paid his dues, basically.
he really did. You know, he got to see how the whole business worked from the ground up.
Okay, and that's got to be valuable, right? I mean, that's like understanding the recipe before you start trying to be the head chef.
Absolutely. And not only that, he's also got experience managing a private equity fund where he invested in startups.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like Agoro,
Okay.
the electric scooter company.
Yeah, those are cool.
Yeah, and also S-Lite, the bookstore chain.
Okay, so he's got that kind of entrepreneurial side as well.
It's exactly. He's got a broad range of experience, which is really valuable in a leadership position.
Makes sense. So he rejoined AcBel in 2017 as a VP overseeing that all-important power supply division, and then boom, general manager in 2020.
Wow. That's a pretty quick rise.
Yeah, right? Like he knows what he's doing.
Sounds like it. So what's your impression of him as a leader?
Well, from everything I've heard, Jerry's known for being pretty approachable and a really good coordinator.
Oh, okay.
Apparently, he's got this like quiet leadership style, but he's really good at bringing people together and getting them working towards a common goal.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, and I think a good example of that is the collaboration between Kinpo and AcBel since he took over as general manager.
Okay.
They've got this like really smooth partnership going on.
Nice.
Like they did this whole thing with Amazon for their smart speakers where AcBel was in charge of making the power supply and then Kinpo handled the assembly.
Oh, wow.
So it was a real team effort.
That's a great example of how the different parts of the Kinpo group can work together, really effectively.
Exactly. So like they each have their specialty, but they can come together to make this really great final product.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like he's doing a great job, but I'm curious about this whole Kinpo group structure. Because Jerry's actually mentioned that he has like, quote unquote, many bosses.
Many bosses.
Yeah, so what's the deal with that? I mean, how does that even work?
Well, it's kind of like being part of a big family,
Mm-hmm.
Where everyone has their own area of responsibility,
Right.
but they all report to the head of the family.
So it's like a family business, but on a massive scale.
Exactly. And, Jerry's bosses are actually executives at other Kinpo Group companies.
Okay.
So you've got like Chen Wai-Chang from Calcomp Electronics and Weng Sung Ping from Compal Electronics.
So they all have a stake in AcBel's success.
They do. And it's interesting because this kind of structure allows for a lot of collaboration between the different companies within the group.
Okay, so it's not just like a top-down hierarchy, it's more like a network.
Exactly. It's more collaborative.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So even though he's got all these bosses, Jerry's still got his own vision for AcBel. He's laid out these 3 main areas that he wants to focus on for growth.
Oh, yeah. What are those?
So first up, those high-margin power supplies.
Of course.
Got to keep the lights on.
Got to make money.
Exactly. Then automotive electronics. So basically stuff for cars.
Okay. That's a big market.
Huge market. And then green energy.
So they're really looking to the future.
Yeah, they're not just sticking with the status quo. They're trying to be ahead of the curve. And speaking of that, they've actually been making some pretty strategic shifts in their focus. They haven't just been, clinging to that original computer power supply business.
Right. So tell me more about how they've been diversifying.
So back in 2014, they started getting into the clean energy sector.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like they saw the writing on the wall and they were like, okay, we need to be a part of this.
That's smart.
Right. And within their traditional power supply business, they've been focusing on those higher margin areas like power solutions for data centers and 5G base stations.
Okay, so like the backbone of the internet and mobile networks.
Exactly. And they've even managed to break into that North American data center market, which is not easy to do.
No, it's not. So they're really making some headway there.
Yeah, and get this, they're also a supplier of power supply units for SpaceX's ground stations for their low Earth orbit satellites.
Wow.
Like, how cool is that? They're powering space internet.
That's incredible.
Right, and it doesn't stop there. They also provide components and manufacturing services to Bloom Energy,
Okay.
a fuel cell company. And they invested in Gogoro and became a supplier for their charging infrastructure. So they're really plugged into these futuristic trends.
It sounds like they're positioning themselves really well for this transition to cleaner energy.
Totally. And speaking of transitions, let's talk about electric vehicles because AcBel is getting in on that action too.
Okay, how so?
They're actually working with Japanese and American automakers to develop motor control systems, power converters, all those things that make electric cars go.
That's a big step.
It is. And I mean, getting into the auto industry is no joke. It's a tough business to crack.
It is. It's very competitive.
Right. But the payoff can be huge.
Absolutely.
It's like a long-term investment that could really pay off big time.
And you know what's even more impressive? Is that they're not just stopping at being a supplier.
What do you mean?
Well, they're actually investing directly in the energy sector themselves.
Oh, really?
Yeah, their green energy division is aiming to be more service-oriented. They're bidding on government projects, and they're actually building their own solar power plants.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they're aiming for a total installed capacity of 137 megawatts by this year.
So they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk.
Exactly. They're putting their money where their mouth is.
Okay, so it sounds like they've got all these big plans, but I mean, have they hit any roadblocks along the way?
Well, like any company, they've faced some challenges.
Yeah.
There were the component shortages that everyone was dealing with.
Right, the global supply chain issues.
Exactly. And some of their new ventures haven't grown quite as quickly as they might have hoped.
Right.
But, they're staying optimistic and they're continuing to invest in these key areas.
So they're in it for the long haul.
They are.
That's good to hear. Okay, so let's dive into this OmniOn acquisition because it sounds like that was a pretty big deal for them.
It was. It really
Yeah.
was. Their revenue jumped significantly after that acquisition.
So it was a good financial move.
Absolutely. And not just that their profitability also increased.
Right.
despite the one-time costs associated with the acquisition, their gross profit and operating income both went up significantly.
Wow, so they made a smart purchase.
They really did.
And what's interesting is that even though power supplies still make up the bulk of their revenue,
Right.
that new business sector, which includes those energy and electric vehicle power supplies,
Yes.
that showed some really impressive growth.
Oh, yeah. Over 300% both year over year and quarter over quarter.
That's huge.
Yeah. So it shows that they're making real progress in those areas.
Okay, so let's break down the profitability of those different segments, because I'm curious, like, which ones are really bringing in the big bucks?
Sure. So OmniOn's telecom power supplies, those actually have the highest profit margins.
Really?
Yeah, followed by AcBel's new energy and EV ventures, and then their more traditional enterprise power supplies.
Okay, so it sounds like they're right on track with their strategy of shifting towards those higher margin products.
Absolutely. They're making the right moves.
That's good to hear.
Uh,
So beyond the financial boost, what other benefits did they get from that OmniOn deal?
Well, there were some valuable intangible assets like goodwill and trademark recognition.
Okay.
And it's important to note that AcBel and OmniOn are currently operating as separate entities.
Okay, so they're keeping them distinct for now.
They are, but they've created a synergy council to explore potential areas of collaboration.
Okay, so like a matchmaking service for the two companies?
Kind of, yeah. They're looking at things like sales, procurement, R&D, and manufacturing.
So what kind of synergies are they hoping to achieve? I mean, what's the end game here?
Well, one of the big things is leveraging OmniOn's strong relationship with a major North American telecom provider
Okay.
and potentially expanding that to other big players in the market.
So it's like they got a foot in the door.
Exactly. And then on the procurement side, AcBel has some favorable payment terms that could benefit OmniOn.
Okay, so it's like a win-win.
Right. And they're also exploring how OmniOn's high-power telecom technology could be adapted for consumer applications.
Wow.
So, imagine that kind of power in your home appliances.
That's pretty cool. And then finally, they're looking at optimizing OmniOn's manufacturing capacity.
Right. So they're really trying to make the most of this acquisition.
Yeah, it's like they're putting all the pieces together to create this powerhouse company.
Exactly.
So what's been the impact on OmniOn's operations and team since the acquisition? I mean, has it been disruptive?
Well, from what I've heard, it's been pretty smooth sailing.
Okay.
The existing leadership at OmniOn has remained in place,
Okay.
and the employees seem to be pretty positive about the merger.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, and the plan is to gradually integrate things like budgets
Right.
and eventually align their HR and IT systems.
Okay. So it's a slow and steady approach.
It is.
Smart. All right. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about AcBel's moves in the automotive electronics space, because that's a hot market right now.
It is.
So what are they focusing on in that area?
So right now, their main focus is on what we call onboard applications for American and Japanese clients.
Okay.
So things like integrated products for a Japanese customer that was a big growth driver for them last year.
So they're providing the guts of the electric vehicle.
Essentially, yeah. And looking ahead, they're expecting growth to come from manufacturing DC charging piles
Okay.
for an American operator. And they're actually collaborating with another company in the Kinpo Group on this.
So they're really leveraging those connections.
They are. And it's interesting because the EV market maybe didn't have quite the impact that they initially anticipated,
Right.
but they're still pursuing those opportunities pretty aggressively.
Because they're not giving up on it.
No, they're not. They see the potential there,
That's good to hear. Okay, now we got to talk about the elephant in the room.
which is,
AI.
oh, yes,
I mean, it's everywhere these days.
it is.
So how is AcBel playing in that space?
Well, their traditional server power supply business doesn't really cater to the high power requirements of those AI data centers.
Right, because those things are power hungry.
They really are.
Yeah.
But with the acquisition of OmniOn, they might have gained some capabilities in that high kilowatt power supply segment.
Okay, so they're kind of getting their foot in the door.
They are. And, it's a space to watch, definitely.
Right, so let's wrap up by looking at the future. What are AcBel's targets and what's the overall outlook?
Sure. So the outlook for Q4 2023 indicated a bit of a market slowdown, but they were expecting their revenue to remain fairly stable.
Okay.
But looking ahead to this year, they're anticipating growth in a few key areas,
Yeah.
like a mid-wattage branded server power supplies. And they're even in talks for higher wattage options. And also significant growth in telecom power, particularly in North America, driven by that ongoing 5G rollout.
Right, so they're riding that 5G wave.
Exactly. And data centers are also expected to contribute to growth this year
Okay.
as they bring on new customers and focus on higher wattage server power products.
Makes sense.
And then there are those charging piles.
Yes, the electric future.
Exactly. Those are projected to be a major growth area this year.
So they're hitting all the right notes.
They really are.
And what about the bigger picture for the entire Kinpo group?
Well, Jerry Su has set a pretty ambitious target for the Kinpo Group to reach NT $600 billion in revenue by 2028.
Wow.
And he sees AI as playing a key role in achieving that.
So it's like a full-on transformation.
It is. And,
Yeah.
AcBel just launched a new compact and efficient power converter for electric vehicles.
Really?
Yeah, and they partnered with ChargePoint to further advance their charging pile technology.
So they're not slowing down at all.
Not at all. They're full steam ahead.
That's impressive. So it sounds like AcBel, under Jerry Su's leadership, is really strategically navigating this ever-changing tech landscape.
Yeah, they are. They're building on their power supply expertise, but they're also aggressively expanding into those high-growth sectors like green energy and electric vehicles.
Yeah, and that OmniOn acquisition seems like it was a really smart move to accelerate that growth.
He was a game changer for sure.
Absolutely. And that ambition to embrace AI within the broader Kinpo group, that points to a pretty exciting future.
It does.
It's funny, my friend Steve, the executive director of the Arizona-Taiwan office, he often talks about how dynamic Taiwanese businesses are, how they adapt to these global trends.
Right.
And AcBel's journey is like a textbook example of that.
It really is a great case study.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in to the Board Sniss channel.
Thanks, everyone.
Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.
We'll see you next time.